Now we are going to focus on some kind of global arrangements among countries, because that is also an important component of governance. Not only we have governance inside countries, but we have an interdependent world in which there are many institutions that focus on governance at a global level, such as the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and even, for example, you can think of a European Union as what we call a supranational or above national organization among a group of countries. So a new initiative, a new global arrangement that has emerged since 2013 is what is known as the Belt and Road Initiative. And the name is an evolved name which has to do with the historic trade route between Asia and Europe called the Silk Road, which on one hand originated in China, it came all the way through Central Asia, Middle East, and went to Europe, and there was a significant amount of trade back then, especially in spices, in rugs, carpets. Europeans had a very strong demand for spice coming from India, from China. But this is a new version that is primarily a Chinese initiative. After achieving significant amount of economic growth, China realized that it is in its interest to facilitate trade among nations. But many countries in the developing world did not have good infrastructure and did not have really enough money, sufficient financing to develop infrastructure that was needed for trade. So we are talking about 2012, 2013. We are at sort of the peak of Chinese industrial manufacturing production. China needs a lot of raw materials, and it's going all around the world to buy the raw materials needed for its industrial activity, but it realizes that many African countries do not have good ports, do not have good railroad to transport those. On the other hand, China has this huge production capacity. These countries could become good consumers if they can develop their economy and initiate some kind of economic growth. So that was the thinking. The idea was presented to the world by Xi Jinping in 2013. He came to power in 2012, so this was one of the ideas that very early on he presented them. And he presented this idea first, the idea of the New Silk Road. They called it New Silk Road back then. In the country of Kazakhstan, the country that did not exist before 1991. It was part of the Soviet Union. Now these are all called Central Asian countries: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, this tiny country. So China realized the significance of expanding trade linkages eastward into Asia, and you can see that from Asia it can link into Middle East and also into Europe. But of course, it was expansion in all directions, not just eastward, as we are going to see. So here it is, the visit to Nazarbayev to Kazakhstan, and this man is the leader of Kazakhstan back then. He's still alive, but his family and other members of his family are now in charge of Kazakhstan. Not he himself. He was the initial founder after the country gained independence. Anyways, this is how the idea was presented to the world, and gradually many countries have joined this initiative. So we want to see what it is, what kind of global cooperation is already taking place within this arrangement of the Belt and Road Initiative, that sometimes is also called BRI, just as a brief way of describing. So, it has two components, the belt and the road. You think that the road should be the inland connections, but actually it has the land connections, meaning development of railroads, highways that go on land in Asia coming in this direction. That's one component, that's the belt component. And then development of ports around the world. Efficient, well-functioning ports that can develop what is called the maritime Silk Road. So the road points to the sea lines, that the sea routes that China wanted to create in cooperation with countries that were willing to join. As you can see, for example, there are a number of ports all around the world. This is the Suez Canal port. There are several ports in Europe. The largest one being this one in Greece, called Piraeus port. And then many of them all around here, and new ones being developed in Latin America. So you have the belt, which is shown as inland roads, and you have the development of ports and logistics for sea trade, which is referred to as the road. So this is what it looks like. This was what was envisioned as the Belt and Road Initiative. Any idea how many countries have joined this initiative in the past, one could say, 11, 12 years since it was established? To join Belt and Road primarily means that you sign a contract with China. It could be with other countries, but what really matters is China, because China is the primary participant and manager of this project. Any idea? 140 countries already. Of the 200 countries that we have in the board, 140 have already joined. And it's not just development of roads and transportation, it also includes investments in other infrastructure. In some countries, projects that are sponsored and financed through these agreements with China include power plants, include hospitals, include development of mines. So, and also real estate, development of some very large real estate projects. So you can see the details of what these can be. At the bottom we can identify them. For example, you can see the ports. There are many of them. And this one is the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which became controversial because it was developed but it did not attract enough traffic to become financially self-sufficient. And we're going to talk about the challenges that these projects have faced as well. So here is the pattern of membership growth in the Belt and Road Initiative. As of latest statistics of 2023, it was 141. And you can see which countries have joined in which stages. Many countries in Asia are early stages, they have joined in early stages. For example, the Central Asian countries, and then we come forward to the ones most recently, one of the most recent ones being Argentina. And then we have a few Central Asia, Afghanistan, after finally the US withdrawal has joined, and we can see many others. What is surprising is that we have already talked about the growing tensions and competition between the United States and China. And the United States has encouraged and even has pushed, used its diplomatic pressure to discourage many countries from joining by warning them about the adverse consequences that they might face. And obviously in Europe, by warning that you are members of European Union, you are members of NATO, and you should not join these initiatives which are primarily sponsored and managed by China. Because of the, unfortunately, because of the emerging Cold War between China and the United States. But what you notice is that many countries in Eastern Europe have joined. One of the most active countries in the BRI is the small country of Hungary, which genetically the people of Hungary believe that they are of Asian descent from Han tribes in China. That's why they call themselves Hungary. For that reason, or for plus other reasons, they have been very interested in expanding their cooperation with China. But as you can see, African countries, many of them have joined Belt and Road Initiative. And China itself has presented Belt and Road not as a replacement for the existing trade agreements in the world, and China has repeatedly said that we are not here to initiate a competition with the United States. The Belt and Road is not expanding at the expense of any country. What is the favorite phrase of Chinese president? Win-win arrangements. He continuously emphasizes in his speeches that this is a win-win arrangement, meaning that there is no winner-loser. In your classes, probably you are familiar with the concept of zero-sum games. Games where one player's gain is always associated with another player's loss. But China has tried to present its rise as saying that we are not interested in competition or confrontation. We are really looking for win-win solutions and strategies. So here is how it has expanded. And notice that it's not just the low-income countries who have joined, because they have an incentive. China provides financing for countries once they sign agreements, which are called strategic economic agreements. They can qualify for financing from Chinese banks for some of these projects. But notice that there are also very high income countries and upper middle income countries who have also joined, including many European countries. As you can see here, Eastern European countries. Of course, one of the most recent ones was Argentina, despite the fact that the United States was discouraging Latin American countries from developing these memberships in Belt and Road. But during the Winter Olympic Games, the Argentinian president attended the Games, and he also signed a comprehensive strategic agreement with China. They call it strategic cooperation agreements. Any comments? Any ideas about this development? It is an important emerging arrangement. How do you know it's important? One way is to look at the large number of projects that have already been completed. Another way of knowing that this is significant for global geopolitics is to look at the reaction that it has provoked. The rationale that US presented was that this ends up becoming a financial trap or a debt trap. It said that China will offer you, this is what the United States said repeatedly, especially, for example, to Pakistan, which is one of the most important partners in this initiative, with well over $60, $70 billion of Chinese investments. The US argument was that China offers you these loans for these projects, but these are loans and you have to pay them back. Then after a while you are not able to pay them back, and that means that China will come and demand to convert these into equity assets. Therefore, Chinese will start purchasing assets in your country. You become in debt to China, and that debt will accumulate, and you will face financial difficulties of being an indebted nation because you have to service. That was the argument that the United States made to many of these countries. The United States is worried that many of these countries, which were part of the trade partners and the sphere of influence of Europe and the United States, would now become part of the China-Russia bloc. So, for example, Europeans, because of their past colonial relations with Africa, took it for granted that Africa is sort of their backyard, and the markets of Africa belong to them. They would sell their products. They would intervene in Africa whenever a regime is in danger. And Africans in international affairs would side with the United States and Europe. But that is not changing. Now, when the United States kept calling on these countries and saying, do not approach China, their response was that for all of these years after World War II, we have been asking you to invest in our countries. Western investment is very minimal. Western governments have provided limited amount of aid. Western corporations are not willing to take the risk, but Chinese companies are willing to come and invest. We do not present an alternative. Therefore, when China comes and is willing to build our railroad, is going to help us build infrastructure, we welcome that. Because if you want, here, you offer us money, but the problem is that, and we're going to go into that, China had by 2012, China had accumulated huge amount of surplus, huge amount of savings, approaching maybe $800 billion to $1 trillion. And some argue that it was $1.3 trillion. Take that and then compare that with the financial condition of the United States. About $200 billion deficit every year, and the United States is a net deficit country. US is in debt rather than having surplus. Europeans themselves financial problems. So the US and Europe did not have the finances to match China, but they were encouraging countries to stay away from China. Along with creation of the Belt and Road Initiative, obviously money was needed. So what did China do? It imitated what the United States had done after World War II. The United States, in order to finance development, created the World Bank. And it asked countries to contribute savings, and member countries that put some money in the World Bank qualified to borrow money for development projects. Similar to that, the Belt and Road Initiative, primarily China, proposed the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, which was established in 2014. So, just like World Bank, you put some money into it as a member of Belt and Road Initiative, and then you come to this bank and you ask for financing of projects. So you can see who has contributed. The largest amount of capital initially was from China, $29 billion, and then India, Russia, and so on. And you also had smaller amounts by many oil exporting countries. For example, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates. All of these countries get rich in this kind of investment. And you can see the affiliation of countries that are have invested. Some of them are OECD countries. Italy has put money in here. Look at France, Germany, South Korea. So while the US was not involved, other industrial countries were willing to participate in this initiative. And from that, many projects have been financed. But of course, the financing of Belt and Road projects has not been limited to just this bank. China has instructed the Import-Export Bank of China to also provide significant amount of money. And several other banks, the China Development Bank also. Why do they do that? Because in many of these projects, Chinese firms are main contractors. Therefore, when they provide financing for these projects, they are providing contract opportunities and jobs for Chinese corporations, which is exactly what the United States does when the US finances a project in a developing country, and this is exactly what European countries do as well. Every time a country spends money, they make sure if they spend money in another country, they make sure their own contractors benefit from. This is true of military expenditure and civilian expenditure. Okay, so this is some of the main corridors that were proposed to be developed. This middle one here is called the Middle Corridor. And you have the Northern Corridor. There was one which is well underway, and I think it's already operational, connecting Western China to the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, right here, completely going down through Pakistan. A very difficult and mountainous terrain in northern Pakistan, so a lot of money has been spent to develop the roads and make it feasible to go through them. Another important one, again, coming from China and going through Central Asia, Iran, Turkey. Already there is railroad link from China going all the way through Central Asia, Europe, through Russia and then Eastern Europe, and it goes all the way to Germany. So that land connectivity through train is already available. Of course, it's not as cheap as sea routes, so for bulk products, it's not efficient, but for high value items, such as computers, computer chips, or something that has very high value, this land route is efficient. And of course, along with that, you have tourism that is expanding in these regions, and cultural exchange, all kinds of activities. Now the question is, what is it overall? Let's have a look at what it is, and then we'll talk about China's motivations for this. So, to give it a definition, just to know what it is. Number one, it is a modern network of overland pipelines, roads, and railways in Asia and Europe. It does have a number of activities in Latin America as well, but as far as connectivity, it is primarily in Asia and Europe, and of course, Africa. From Asia down to Middle East and then to Africa. This initiative is not a free trade agreement among many countries. So countries that join the Belt and Road do not lower their tariffs, eliminate it completely. If you do that on a large number of products, then we say you have a free trade agreement. It's not a custom union when you reduce the custom agreements. It's primarily agreements for development of infrastructure with financing and with participation of Chinese engineering firms and construction firms. So the focus is on infrastructure, education, roads, healthcare, all kinds of infrastructure. Initially, the primary focus was on facilitating trade because of China's need for trade, but more recently it has gone into digital industry and digital technology. China is a primary provider of 5G technology to the rest of the world, primarily because up until a couple of years ago, no other country had that capacity. And even now, no other country has the capacity to export because the United States, Europe are very busy developing their own 5G. But China has the extra capacity to introduce digital technology in the rest of the world. And they are doing that aggressively, for example, in Africa, in Middle East and South Asia. So if Belt and Road Initiative is not a free trade agreement which is comprehensive about lowering all the barriers to trade such as tariffs, what is it? First of all, it's not an agreement among many countries, a single agreement. Example of that would be the European Union, one large institution. Belt and Road is a collection of bilateral agreements, most of them with China, but also agreements among some of the members themselves. It represents what is often referred to as a strategic partnership. Many countries, when they sign that document, it's called a strategic partnership. With some countries that are more important to China, it becomes comprehensive strategic partnership. So for example, Saudi Arabia is a major provider of oil and gas to China. And Saudi Arabia is also involved in what we call bilateral investments with China, meaning a lot of money Saudis invest in China, and Chinese invest a lot in Saudi Arabia. So the relations are very deep. That's why Saudi-China agreement, Belt and Road Agreement, is called a comprehensive strategic partnership. So that means you have tier 1 partners. Their agreement is called comprehensive strategic partnership. And then tier 2, which is majority of countries, is called just strategic partnership. One stage below that is called memorandum of understanding, meaning two countries are beginning to negotiate. They are moving in the direction of partnership. They call it memorandum of understanding, MOU. That's how they generally write it. Questions? Okay. So here are some of the projects to see what that bank AIIB has done. Here are some examples of projects. The largest sectors that have received financing are energy, transportation, water, financial sector. So these are generally the larger sectors that have received financing. Not so much education, for example. Education has a small share. Internet and connectivity, which is the digital technology, and healthcare financing, healthcare initiatives were undertaken by China after COVID. Because initially the shock of COVID was very severe in China, but Chinese government was able to quickly turn it around. And then China started to provide support to other countries, significant amount of masks, of course, it took a while to develop the vaccine, medical support, all kinds of support, and overall investment in healthcare was accelerated after COVID-19. So you can see that already this initiative is working, financing projects, and projects are well underway. Now, in terms of magnitude, this Belt and Road Initiative is still underway. The amount of Chinese commitment depends on domestic economy of China, the political will of Chinese government, and obviously the international climate. Now, domestic economy of China has been in trouble lately. It is not growing as fast. It is still growing. But despite the fact that inside China there has been criticism of the Belt and Road Initiative, because many people are saying, why are we spending the national saving of China on other countries? Why not spend it inside or save it? Some of these projects might not have a positive rate of return. Some of them might go bankrupt. Some countries might not be able to pay us back. So there is some opposition, although not very vocal. Obviously, we are familiar with the political system of China. But the Chinese Communist Party and President Xi himself have said that they are fully committed to this project. So the amount of money has been estimated that if you look at the value of money that is going to be spent on this project, I believe the plan is to carry it on until 2030. It's something between a lower bound of $3.5 trillion and the upper bound of close to $8 trillion, a huge amount of money. Now, if you compare that to what the United States spent on helping the countries after World War II, that was called the Marshall Plan, the US Marshall Plan. Nominally, that was very small, about 13 billion. But of course, $13 billion in 1945 to 1960, when you adjust that for prices, is equivalent to something like $130 billion, which is still relatively small compared to what the Belt and Road Initiative is going to invest in these projects. So it is a very large project, and it's already in many countries making a difference. To give you an example, the port of Piraeus in Greece. The Greece was bankrupt, and that port was not functioning at all. And nobody was willing to invest in upgrading the port. It was the Chinese that, after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, when Greece was in very, very deep trouble, stepped forward and invested in development of that port, and that is now emerging as the second largest port in Europe. Another example is, of course, there are many examples in Africa, but another very visible example of these projects is in Egypt, where China has been investing in very large scales near the Suez Canal for manufacturing and developing a logistic hub. So these are all already working. But in some countries, they are running into, the host country is running into financial trouble. In some countries, there is corruption, which reduces the effectiveness of these projects. Because the bureaucracy is corrupt, and it makes it very difficult for the project to move on time and be cost efficient. So, as far as what has been accomplished and what is underway, if you look at this map, you can see different types of activities. Oil and gas pipelines are very important components of it because of China's need for these products. But notice the railroad. Already, you can see the development of these railroads that have benefited from Belt and Road financing. And you can see that several other projects are underway. Gas pipelines, construction underway, especially from Russia coming into China and Western China, and development of several ports. So one of the successful projects already is the one that connects Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti, facilitating trade for Ethiopia, which is a landlocked country with very little access to sea trade. Okay, but now let's talk about China's motivation. Why spend such a huge amount of money And was there any logic to the decision of Chinese leader Xi Jinping for initiating this project? Now, if China was a standard democracy where people could vote and change leaders, it would have been impossible for China to spend this much money overseas, because people would have voted against it. Domestic national interests. It would have been either impossible or very different in terms of what would have been done. Nevertheless, the political system of China allowed it to happen. But there was some logic behind it. It's not without planning and vision in terms of China's long-term economic interest. So, China obviously benefits from development of these infrastructures because as China develops these ports, for example, for trade, part of the condition for financing them is that Chinese will have access to them, Chinese ships, they would have logistic facilities in those ports, so the ports facilitate trade for China. Similarly, when they invest in mines, development of mines, the contract calls for long-term extraction and export to China. These developments, especially the landlines, also have facilitated tourism from Central Asia, for example. You can see many large numbers of tourists traveling by train, by plane, coming to China. Another logic for this is the geography of China. We said that pollution was a concern in eastern China. Eastern parts of China were moving towards high-value technologies, advanced manufacturing, finance, financial technology, computer. So there was an opportunity to shift some industries towards eastern regions of China. The development of trade links in eastern China with Central Asia, and we can see that if we let's see. I want you to be able to see the map as well. As you can see, the eastern region of China, maybe I can find but right here, we can look at this map as we look at these priorities. So the industries have been shifted and are already manufacturing activities expanding in western regions of China. But look at the advantage that you have for trade from those, for example, through Pakistan to the Indian Ocean. If you produce something here, it might not be economic to send it by train all the way through China to Western China and then to Central Asia and Europe. But production activities in western region of China are very close to the border. It is economical to send those by train, by railroad, down to Pakistan into Indian Ocean, or through Central Asia. More important than that, if you are importing oil from Pakistan through pipelines and importing natural gas, as soon as they arrive in China, you can set up industrial activities in western regions of China. You don't have to transport it all the way through here. And this little land route or train route can be economical versus sending it by ship that has to go through here, all the way through the Malacca Strait and come down here and go to eastern China. So that was the second region, focus on western region of China. The other reason for it was that by 2012, 2013, China had already developed a very large engineering capacity, construction capacity, in shipbuilding, in building roads and railways and bridges, all kinds of things. Internal development of infrastructure was almost finished. So you had millions of workers, thousands of corporations that would have gone unemployed. Either you had to restructure the economy, find other jobs for them, or you had to find something for them to do outside your country. So the Belt and Road Initiative took advantage of that excess capacity. Millions of workers that could have been unemployed continued to work, but not inside China. Now they were working in Africa, Latin America, Asia. So that makes sense. We created opportunities for them. Clearly, by providing loans, by creating these trade linkages, China was able to and is able to increase its sphere of diplomatic influence. Along with the Belt and Road, you have cultural exchange, the Confucius societies, the societies that promote Chinese culture, offer Chinese language classes, were established in many of these countries, and they are already functioning. And because of the growing trade with China, you have now a growing number of people in many countries learning Chinese so that they can trade with China and go back and forth for trade. So that was another advantage. Another important advantage was that it would facilitate an alternative route for trade with Europe and Central Asia. Those routes that were called Silk Road, the traditional Silk Road, served a positive function in the past, but they were all destroyed because trade of the Asian countries, Africa, all of these regions were redirected towards trading with European countries, and trade with each other was neglected. China realized that they can now create this linkage to Europe. In terms of global alliances, we already see that some European countries are now trying to, some of them are even staying neutral rather than siding with the United States. That's partly because of all of these trade and investment engagements with China. Development of these alternative routes had a very important strategic and security relevance for China as well. Because if you look at this map, the large map here we have, let's expand that. Okay, so look at the position all around here. The United States has military facilities. How many military facilities does the United States have around the world? Bases, secret bases, storage facilities, between 700 to 800. Some of the most important strategic choke points around the world. A lot of US military assets are in Persian Gulf. You have many of them in Suez Canal, Mediterranean, but most important for China is this strait between Indonesia and Singapore. I think almost all of oil and gas and minerals that go to China through sea routes go through here. It's the most efficient pathway, the standard pathway. But Singapore is a military strategic ally of the United States. So is Australia. So is Philippines. United States has military bases all around China. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. So what does that mean? It means that China's trade, especially trade in strategic goods like oil, natural gas, very essential commodities for Chinese industry, are vulnerable to US military power. If there is tension between US and China, the United States, first of all, has absolute military supremacy over all other countries in the world. And the US is present all around the trade routes that China uses. So what did China decide? We need some alternatives so that if there is tension with the United States, we are not completely vulnerable. That's why this route through Pakistan is so essential. It is an alternative route for transferring essential commodities. China is working in here, what is called the North-South Corridor, which connects Iran to Central Asia. Alternative routes for trade with Russia, this pipeline, so that China, in case the oil and gas from Persian Gulf is disrupted, at least the flow from Russia can continue, both for oil and natural gas, and so on. So this strategic position is also very crucial. So these are some of the justifications that China had for developing this initiative. Any questions? Okay, so this picture gives you some image of what has been accomplished in terms of trade, in terms of investment. This is the distribution of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative investments and construction engagements by region. Look at the investments. First of all, you can identify the region. This is East Asia, naturally the close, near neighborhood to China, and many countries with good governance, good economic condition, hospitable, such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, even those that, because of their alliance with the United States, have to hold back some of their investments, still Chinese investments in those countries are substantial. Australia, for example, the largest amount of Chinese investment in mining is in Australia because of its significant amount of coal deposits. And you can see other regions, Sub-Saharan Africa, about 17%. These are investments. We usually divide Chinese projects in the rest of the world into construction because construction is very large by itself, and then in all other investments. That's why you have two types of investment. And obviously in construction, you can see that there is a huge amount in Sub-Saharan Africa and also in the Middle East. But when we study these patterns, so we ask ourselves, why is it that some countries receive more Chinese investment? Those Chinese investments have to tend to be a direct Chinese investment, so that the assets belong to Chinese corporations, either public or private. Construction projects are different. Most of those, the project belongs to the government It is the service contract that is signed by a Chinese firm. For example, Chinese firm builds a road, okay, or builds a high-rise building. The owner is the host country or an institution in the host country, but China is doing it because China has the technology and engineering capacity. It's a contract that they sign to develop that for the host country. Now, when we look at why are they different, why is it that there is so much construction projects in sub-Saharan Africa, but China's investments are large in East Asia? It has to do with governance quality of the host country. So what we observe is that in advanced economies with good governance, we see more Chinese investments, direct investments, than construction contracts. Why is that? Because Chinese firms, like American firms, like European firms, care about property rights, care about the quality of bureaucracy and the investment environment, correct? So in good countries, in terms of governance, they are willing to invest. Maybe in sub-Saharan Africa or in Arab countries or in some other developing countries, the host government wants Chinese firms to invest. But they look around and say, I don't know if my property, what I invest in, the property right would be respected. If I invest and I start doing business, will the bureaucracy really support and allow me to be profitable, or will I end up having to pay so much bribe and I would face so much red tape that I would lose money? So in those countries where they think that governance is poor, they prefer to do contract job. They say, well, I'm coming here to build for you. You just pay me to build it. But I'm not willing to invest as much. They do invest, but not as much. So this pattern is already emerging in terms of China's behavior, which of course is rational. In every business initiative, you have to look at all the risks, potential for profit, and assess which strategy is better. So here is some, let's look at some projects. Here is one example. This is in Bangladesh. I think this is a railroad and road project, one of those things that China is good at because they have done so much of these inside China already. In 2016, China promised to spend around $26 billion for BRI projects and $14 billion on joint ventures, totaling the size of $40 billion. That was a pledge to invest in Bangladesh. And this is the Padma Bridge, which will carry road and rail line under construction in Bangladesh. This is already under construction. Perhaps it's even has made more progress because this is, I believe, 2 or 3 years ago. But here is a list of projects that have been pledged. Pledging and actually spending of money are two different things. And when you study a country or you look into bilateral relations between countries, you must always look for both to understand what is going on. Because you might have a huge amount of pledge of investment, but not actually being materialized. So this table shows you what has been done. For example, the Padma Bridge, the cost is $2.7 billion, the one that we just saw the picture of. The amount is spent already by 2019 was $533. Agreement was signed in 2018, so this is a recent. And so on. You can see that The work in Bangladesh, for example, is already underway. But not always things go smoothly. And negotiations of various countries with China really depends on the leverage that that government has. Sometimes it has to do with the leadership's legitimacy inside and their willingness to take risk and make tough negotiations. Sometimes it has to do with the alternatives that they have. So the quality of these projects, as far as the benefit to the host country, varies from country to country. One country that has been considered a success is Indonesia. Indonesia's leader, I don't remember the name now, but the past 6 years he has done a good job of negotiating with China, and the projects that China has performed in Indonesia have been relatively successful, on schedule, and proven to be economically successful. Some of them in Philippines, on the other hand, for example, have run into trouble. And here you see an example of some successful and some not successful projects in Bangladesh as a case study. The Bangladesh has cancelled some of the BRI projects to avoid borrowing too much and facing a debt crisis. So when countries want to finance these projects, of course it's tempting to get the money and get the projects going, but you have to ask yourself carefully, is it financially viable? And what is our total debt, external debt? What can we do if we borrow more for this? Okay, so another aspect of these Belt and Road initiatives that has attracted attention and was provoking criticism of China was the question of the environment. Whether the environmental impact of these developments was taken into account carefully. Initially, China and the host countries did not pay much attention. But now that China in recent years is emerging as a major power, especially obviously a major economic power, the Chinese government has become more sensitive to environmental issues, both inside the country, and we talked about that already, but also environmental concerns on Belt and Road initiatives. That's because of public relations, and also because they are also realizing that issues like global warming are real and serious. Damaging the natural environment in one country would affect all countries. So here is an analysis, 2002, not very old, and it looks at the investments by Chinese banks that have been financed by various Chinese institutions. And there is now a concept emerging called green investment principles, which means that financial institutions around the world make a pledge when they gather together and to make sure investments that they undertake meet minimum standards for protecting the environment and minimizing the impact on global warming. So here are some of these principles. Embedded sustainability in corporate governance, understanding environmental, social, and governance risks of the projects that the bank, for example, wants to finance, disclosing the environmental information, enhancing communication with the stakeholders, utilizing green finance investments, and so on. You don't have to memorize them. You just need to know that there is this package, and you can see the list of some of the Chinese companies, or financial institutions, that have already pledged that they are going to observe these. For several years, China was actively investing in coal plants because they needed the coal, or the host country needed the coal, and also because China already had the technology, but they wanted to switch to clean energy. So they were willing to export that technology to other countries. They did that for several years. For example, in Pakistan, China financed several power plants that are coal power plants. And there was a lot of criticism, political pushback in Pakistan because of the pollution associated with coal power plants. And finally, in recent years, Bank of China has announced that it will no longer finance coal power plants because of environmental concerns.